To reach further, to explore the unknown, to be the first, all factors to the start of space exploration. It all started in 1957 when the Soviet Union sent the first man-made satellite into space. Next, the United States created the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, in 1958. It was 1959 when it was first announced that NASA would be sending humans to space. In 1961, John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States at the time, set the goal to have men reach the moon by the end of the 60s. During the time, there was competition between the Soviet Union and the United States of America, not only trying to prove whether communism or capitalism was better, but also to see who could reach farther and explore more of space. This became known as the space race. Scott Carpenter's accomplishments in the exploration of space were important to the start of America's space program because he explored space, was one of America's first astronauts, and his encounter of problems would end up helping NASA improve for flights to come. Malcolm Scott Carpenter was born in Boulder, Colorado on May 1, 1925 to Florence Kelso Carpenter and M. Scott Carpenter. He went to primary school in Boulder and graduated from Boulder High School in 1943. From there, Scott decided to go to the Navy's flight training program. When the program ended, Scott came back to Colorado to major in aeronautical engineering. Aeronautical engineering, which is also a part of aerospace engineering, is the engineering of aircrafts and spacecrafts. Majoring in this was important to Scott becoming an astronaut. After graduation, he joined the Navy and worked at sea during the Korean conflict. He then went to the Navy's flight school and later was put on board the USS Hornet in 1958. While on board the USS Hornet, Carpenter received a message to come to Washington for a special project. He soon found that he was one of the candidates for Project Mercury. The Mercury space program, also called Project Mercury, was a program that planned to send the first Americans to space. The program would end up running from 1959 to 1963 and had the goal to see how much a human could do in space and see if we could go even farther. There were many different types of training to test the candidates' endurance and their flight skills. After starting with a wide range of candidates, it was narrowed down to 110, and from there, after more training and testing, it happened. On April 9, 1959, the Mercury 7 were chosen. Alan Shepard, Gus Grissom, John Glenn, Wally Schirra, Deke Slayton, Gordon Cooper, and of course, Scott Carpenter. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was advancing in the space race too. On April 12, 1961, it happened. The first man flew into space, Yuri Gagarin, who is not American. It did not matter, though, because the whole world was celebrating, including the United States. Still, with NASA having the goal to reach the moon by the end of the 60s, they had their work cut out for them. Soon enough, though, came Alan Shepard, who on May 5, 1961, flew into space in his Freedom 7 capsule and became the first American in space. His short 15-minute flight showed that America could successfully put a man in space. The name Freedom 7, though, would end up affecting all the other capsule names too, including Scott's.
I named it Aurora because I saw it as a celestial event, and the Aurora Borealis is a celestial event. First of all, let's go into 7. Al Shepard started that with Freedom 7. And the press caught that and said, isn't that nice of Al to name his capsule something 7 in honor of the 7 astronauts, his buddies. And everybody believed that. The fact of that matter is that he named it 7 because it was capsule number 7 off the line. And so I had to do something with 7, and it was Aurora 7. But the people back home in Boulder, down on the Front Range, thought, wasn't that nice of Scott to name his capsule Aurora 7 for the fact that he was born and raised in a house in Boulder on the corner of Aurora and 7th Street.
The next man to fly in space was Gus Grissom with Liberty Bell 7, who on July 21st, 1961, became the second American in space. His flight was almost perfect, except for his capsule sinking after splashdown. Now came another first. After 2 suborbital flights, it was time to go farther. On February 20th, 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth. Another successful flight excited America. Then came Scott Carpenter. Originally, the plan was to have Deke Slayton fly the Mercury Atlas 7 flight, but because of an ongoing heart condition, his backup Wally Schirra was going to substitute for him. But instead, it was decided that Scott would fly instead of Wally. The MA7 flight would be right after John Glenn's MA6 flight. Carpenter and Glenn had become very good friends, and even the public knew about it. Scott was in the control room seconds before John Glenn was about to fly into space, and then said what would become his famous words, "Godspeed, John Glenn." NASA just thought it would be right to have Scott's flight after John's. From there, it was certain that Scott would be flying instead of Wally. NASA needed to make sure that it was possible to have a man orbit the Earth again. There would have to be many flights before sending a man to the moon. Was it possible to repeat the success of John Glenn's flight? And then, on May 24th, 1962, came an answer, and it all started with a successful launch. Scott Carpenter launched up into space in his Aurora 7 capsule and began to explore. He had many experiments that he tested during his 4-hour and 56-minute flight, like exploring the boundaries of what effects space had on the human body. The launch of the MA7 flight succeeded, but Carpenter did encounter problems during his flight and during the landing. Scott's fuel ran low and almost ended his 3-orbit flight at 2, but Scott decided he would continue on. During the flight, an important tool that is used to align the capsule to Earth, the Pitch Horizon Scanner, malfunctioned. Because of this, Scott had to guide himself by looking through the small window for parts of the flight. Not only this, Scott soon would find that the timing mechanism for landing had malfunctioned too. These 2 malfunctions affected Scott's landing a great deal, and Scott's misfire that would result because of the malfunctions would end up being one of the most famous parts of his flight. He dealt with these problems by taking what he had learned in training and what he had learned in the many piloting schools he went to. He ended up manually misfiring by 3 seconds and overshot his landing target, and though this may not seem like much, when traveling at such a high speed, it becomes a large distance. When Scott splashed into the ocean, he quickly got out of his capsule and waited until he would be rescued. Recovery planes found and were able to rescue him after he was lost for about 45 minutes. Shortly after, his capsule was recovered too. When Scott was found, all of America celebrated. For the short time that he was lost at sea, it was thought that possibly he had perished, so what a relief it was when Scott was found alive. John F. Kennedy, the president at the time, even called Scott to congratulate him. A successful flight told NASA and America that they could continue on with exploring space. The next flights to come were successful too. Wally Schirra's 6-orbit flight on October 10, 1962 would end up succeeding as well. Then came what ended up being the final Mercury mission, Gordon Cooper's 34-hour and 22-orbit flight in 1963. Project Mercury resulted in only having 6 manned missions, instead of the planned 7, for Deke Slayton still had his ongoing heart condition. On July 21, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon. After multiple years of planning and preparation, man finally walked on the moon. Thanks to Scott Carpenter and the other Mercury astronauts, it was shown that it could be possible. Scott Carpenter passed away October 10, 2013. He is still remembered today for his accomplishments and influence in the start of America's space program. With multiple schools and parks named after him, his name is known and remembered. Being one of America's first astronauts, Scott and the other members of the Mercury 7 showed us it was possible to go farther and continue to explore and send humans into space, which led to the amazing achievement of sending the first man to the moon. Scott Carpenter's encounter of problems helped NASA learn to improve, and his exploration of space was a great factor to the start of space exploration. Scott Carpenter will always be important to American history.